We often think of the Vatican as a beacon of sacred light, a bridge between heaven and earth, where the faith of millions is lifted through prayer and the ringing of church bells across St. Peter's Square. But, what if that light does not come from the Supreme God? What if those golden domes, the ornate vestments, and the sermons of salvation are merely a polished surface, concealing a power far older, far quieter, and long forgotten? From sealed archives buried deep within the Vatican, to ancient manuscripts burned into silence. From serpent-shaped motifs carved subtly into sacred architecture, to disputed rituals conducted in the shadows. All point toward a chilling hypothesis that many fear to say aloud. Is the Vatican truly guiding humanity toward the Supreme God, or, knowingly or not, venerating an impostor in his place? A being once named by ancient Gnostic sages, the Demiurge. A creator, but not of love, rather of control. A god, but not all-powerful, only a blind force that believes itself to be one. This is not an accusation. Nor is it a condemnation of religion. It is an invitation. An invitation to embark on a journey of your own, to peel back the veil on a mystery that has endured for millennia, hidden beneath scriptures, metals, and candlelight. And along this path, we will not only question the Vatican. We will question ourselves. Who, or what, are we truly worshipping? Is the light we lift our eyes to, truly a light of salvation? Or is it a counterfeit radiance, dazzling enough to mesmerize, yet never to liberate? Part 1, The Footsteps of a False God. Of all the questions ever raised about faith, perhaps none is more unsettling than this. What if the God worshipped by millions, is not the Supreme One? To many, such an idea is not only implausible, it's blasphemous. And yet, buried in the quieter currents of religious history, there was once a group who dared to speak the unthinkable. They were called the Gnostics, seekers of hidden knowledge, mystics of the early centuries after Christ. And they carried with them a message that made even the church tremble. According to them, the universe was not created by the true and highest God. This world, chaotic, painful, unjust, could not possibly be the work of an all-good, all-loving being. Instead, it was the handiwork of another entity, the Demiurge. A blind god. A so-called creator driven not by love, but by pride, ignorance, and a lust for control. A being who proclaimed himself God, and built the material world as a prison for the soul. I am God, and there is no other God beside me. That declaration, quoted in the Apocryphon of John, is not, according to the Gnostics, the voice of the Supreme Creator. It is the boast of Yaldabaoth, the name they gave the Demiurge, a being who mistook himself for the divine. In the Gnostic mythos, Yaldabaoth did not even know where he came from. He was born of Sophia, a fallen emanation of divine wisdom, without the permission of the true source. And, cut off from the higher light, he believed himself to be the beginning and the end. So he created, not from love, but from delusion. He fashioned a realm in his own distorted image. And that realm is the world we live in. To the Gnostics, this world is a flawed imitation of divine reality, a place of separation, built of matter, governed by rules, punishment, hierarchy, and control. A spiritual prison where divine light is trapped in human flesh, forgotten and asleep. This is not the Genesis you know. This is not the beginning of creation, but a cosmic hijacking. A lower entity, ambitious, arrogant, and blind, built a system of worship, rituals, and doctrines, not to guide souls to the light, but to bind them to himself. You may ask, if this is true, then who was Jesus in this story? For the Gnostics, he was not a sacrificial lamb sent to absorb humanity's sins. He was a messenger from the true God, a kind of spiritual hacker, sent from a higher dimension to awaken the divine spark hidden in every human being. He didn't come to establish a church. He came to decode the prison that the Demiurge built. And according to the Gnostics, that mission was distorted. Distorted by the very forces he came to challenge, the agents of the Demiurge, whom the Gnostics called archons, rulers of illusion, spiritual enforcers, whose purpose was to keep souls asleep and obedient. These archons don't reveal themselves. They operate through systems, law, empire, tradition, and yes, even religion. So where does the Vatican fit into this picture? We will not rush to conclusions. But once we begin to understand how the Demiurge rules, through fear, symbolism, and sacred ritual, the questions become unavoidable. Who decided which books became part of the Bible, and which were burned? Who shaped the official doctrines, and silenced those who disagreed? Why were all the Gnostic texts, which spoke of a false god and a hijacked world, banned so thoroughly? The deeper you look, the more the architecture of belief starts to feel deliberate, constructed. And one can't help but wonder, when you stand beneath a cathedral's golden dome and lift your eyes to the shimmering ceiling. Where does that light really come from? Part 2, the Vatican and its troubling silence on the Gnostic story. If Gnosticism was just a mistake, why was it feared so deeply? Since the 2nd century AD, Gnostic thinkers have been quietly sharing a message unlike any other. That the God most religions worship is not the true supreme being. That this world is a cosmic deception, a trap operated by an impostor God. And that Jesus did not come to atone for sin, but to awaken. These were not just controversial ideas. They were viewed as an existential threat to the emerging religious structure taking shape under the Roman Empire's wing. And the Vatican, which would later become the central pillar of Orthodox Christianity, was not tolerant. By the 4th century, after Emperor Constantine declared Christianity the state religion, a process of religious standardization began. Books chosen to form the New Testament were deemed canonical. The rest? Labeled heretical. Burned. Erased from history. Dozens of texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Apocryphon of John, Dialogue of the Savior, vanished from public hands for more than 1,000 years. From then on, only one version of Jesus was allowed to remain, a unified, safe, and controllable image. But why the cover-up? If these were simply misguided writings, why the fear? Or, did those banned texts contain a kind of knowledge that could undermine the entire sacred hierarchy? Then came 1945. In the Egyptian desert region of Nag Hammadi, a group of farmers stumbled upon a sealed clay jar. Inside were 13 ancient leather-bound books, written in Coptic, a treasure trove of long-lost Gnostic scriptures. What would later be called the Nag Hammadi Library would forever change how we understand early Christianity. These were not just religious musings. They were spiritual manifestos declaring that the material world is the creation of the Demiurge. That human souls are fragments of divine light trapped in flesh. And that Jesus came not to found a church, but to unlock the path of personal awakening. But perhaps the most revealing aspect wasn't in the texts themselves. It was in the reaction. What did the Vatican say? Not a formal rebuttal. Not an open debate. But rather, silence. No official statement rejecting the Nag Hammadi texts. No serious theological engagement. Instead, the texts were handed off to academic institutions, placed in specialized archives, and rarely, if ever, mentioned in churches. No Sunday sermon speaks of the Gospel of Thomas. No believer is taught that alternative Christianities once coexisted with the New Testament. No priest is encouraged to ask, why did the Gnostic Jesus say, the kingdom is inside of you and all around you, not in buildings of stone? If truth welcomes light, why were these scriptures buried? If Gnosticism is false, why not let believers read and judge for themselves? Perhaps because the truth can be more dangerous than heresy. Because if the Gnostic perspective holds any weight, then the system of rituals, doctrines, and sacred hierarchy today may not be serving the supreme God, but the Demiurge. When knowledge becomes a threat. While the Gnostics saw direct inner knowing, gnosis, as the key to liberation, institutional religion emphasized faith in intermediaries. A faith delivered from pulpits. Wrapped in doctrine. Dispensed by ordained representatives of God. But if a person can connect directly to the divine, who needs intermediaries? Who needs man-made rituals? This is the dangerous intersection. The clash between personal awakening and institutional power. Between spiritual freedom and sacred control. So we must ask, did the Vatican remain silent because it doesn't want you to know that there's another story once told about God? A story that, if you heard it, might make you question the light you worship. And wonder, does that light truly come from heaven? In the next part, we'll explore the strange symbols embedded within Vatican architecture. The serpentine forms, the telescope named Lucifer, and the silent gazes carved in stone. Perhaps the signs are not hidden in ancient texts, but right before our eyes, simply never seen in the right light. Part 3, the enigmatic symbols hidden in Vatican architecture. Once you begin to question who is truly being worshipped, what once seemed like decorative elements, begin to look like clues. The Vatican is not just a religious capital, it is a living museum of symbolism, where an unspoken language is etched in stone, metal, and light. And once you learn how to see it, you may realize that the story being told here is very different from the one preached at the pulpit. 1. The Paul VI Audience Hall, a theater in the serpent's mouth. At the heart of the Vatican stands one of its most modern buildings, the Paul VI Audience Hall, where the Pope often greets pilgrims. At first glance, it's a block of contemporary architecture. But when viewed head-on, or from above, something strange appears. A domed roof shaped like a head, with two windows like eyes. A scaled ceiling, and a central stage located where the mouth would be. The entire structure resembles the head of a giant serpent. Is this coincidence? Or a form of symbolic language, meant for those who know without speaking? And why would the Pope, supposedly the representative of God, speak to the faithful from within the jaws of a snake? 2. The resurrection, statue, Christ, or a post-apocalyptic phantom. Just behind the speaker's podium inside the Paul VI Hall stands a towering sculpture, the Resurrection, depicting Jesus rising from a nuclear explosion. But instead of radiant light, the statue is chaotic, twisted, human forms stretched like dying branches, and Christ's face, in some angles, looks more menacing than merciful. Many have asked, is this a symbol of resurrection? Or the rebirth of a darker force? 3. The L.U.C.I.F.E.R. telescope, what light are they searching for? Beyond religion, the Vatican also has a lesser-known scientific branch, the Vatican Observatory, located on Mount Graham in Arizona, USA. There, an infrared telescope once bore a controversial name. L.U.C.I.F.E.R. Large binocular telescope near-infrared utility with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research. Though the name was later changed, it sparked outrage. After all, Lucifer, in many texts, is another name for the fallen angel, or even a veiled representation of the Demiurge in Gnostic lore. So why would the Vatican, an institution that once condemned magic, heresy, and witchcraft, support a device with that name? Some argue Lucifer originally meant lightbringer. But still, the question remains. What light is being sought? And does it truly come from the supreme God, or from something else entirely? 4. A pagan monument at the Vatican's heart. At the center of St. Peter's Square, visited by millions of pilgrims every year, stands a towering Egyptian obelisk. An obelisk, originally a symbol of Ra, the Egyptian sun god. A symbol of masculine power, fertility, and sun worship. And here's the twist, it's not a replica. It's an authentic pagan relic, transported from Heliopolis, Egypt to ancient Rome. Why would such a pagan monument be planted at the epicenter of global Christianity? Did the Church, in its rise, absorb symbols of ancient power, without ever removing their original spiritual essence? 5. The ancient title, Pontifex Maximus. Even the Pope's title, Pontifex Maximus, is not originally Christian. It was once used by Roman emperors, denoting the high priest of pagan polytheistic religion. So the question arises. Is this a continuation of power? Or a rebranding of the old in the shape of the new? If someone wanted to send a message, but couldn't speak, they would use symbols. And if someone wanted to hide the truth in plain sight, the best place to do it would be within sacred rituals, architecture, and vestments. You see it, but you do not perceive it. We must ask ourselves, are these symbols just cultural integrations, or signs of a hidden belief system? Is the Vatican using these ancient symbols to harness forgotten powers? Or could it still be worshipping the same entity that once received offerings at Heliopolis, under a different name? Part 4, Bloodstains on History, Cathars, Templars, and the Silenced. The history of faith is also the history of fire. Not just the soft glow of prayer candles, but the roaring blaze of pyres. Because every time someone dared to propose a different vision, a new way of seeing God, the soul, or the world, blood was spilled, flames rose, and history was rewritten through fear and silence. But if what they said was false, why the need to erase them entirely? And if what they said was true, could it be that Vatican sought to eliminate those who exposed the Demiurge? 1. The Cathars, bearers of light, or heretics. In the 12th century, a spiritual movement emerged in southern France, the Cathars, also known as the Pure Ones. They believed in two gods. A god of light, divine, invisible, pure. And a god of matter, who created the physical world of suffering and deception. A false creator. To the Cathars, this world was not the work of the true God, but of an impostor. They rejected physical rituals, denied the authority of the Church, and believed that only by renouncing this world could the soul return to divine light. They did not recognize the Vatican. They refused to attend Mass. They called the official church the house of the evil god. And the Church's response? A crusade. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade, targeting the Cathars, heretics within Christian Europe itself. The result, over 20 years of massacre, entire villages annihilated, thousands executed. Historians suggest this was not just a war of theology, but a systematic silencing of those who dared to say, the Church is serving the wrong God. 2. The Templars, holy knights or keepers of forbidden knowledge. The Knights Templar, established to protect Christian pilgrims, became one of the most powerful religious orders of the Middle Ages. But by the 14th century, they were destroyed by King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V. The official charges? Heresy, devil worship, occult practices. But the real reason may have been deeper. Some believe the Templars uncovered a shattering secret beneath the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, where they had once resided. Speculation ranges from ancient Gnostic texts long thought destroyed by the Church, to evidence of a true supreme being, distinct from Yahweh. Some even claim the Templars discovered that the God worshipped by the Church was not the God of light. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the infamous Black Friday, the Templars were arrested en masse. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive after 7 years of imprisonment, condemned by the very powers that once supported them. 3. Were they heretics, or the last keepers of the light? Now place these three revelations side by side. The Cathars believed the Church worshipped a false god. The Templars may have found suppressed truths. The Gnostic said Yahweh is the Demiurge, a blind impostor. You begin to trace a chilling pattern. Those who exposed the Demiurge were annihilated. Was this just coincidence? Or was it evidence that a central power has long been working to protect something, at any cost? History is written by the victors. But truth often whispers from the ashes of the burned. Amid the ruins of Cathar castles, the lost Gnostic scrolls, and the cryptic symbols within the Vatican, one question refuses to fade. Who were the real heretics? Those who asked? Or those who silenced them? Perhaps the real crusade was never about protecting faith. It was about preserving the dominion of a God who demands total obedience and tolerates no light that does not come from him. In the next section, we'll step beyond European history and look to the sacred traditions of ancient civilizations across the world. Because maybe the Demiurge didn't just wear one name. Maybe this false creator wore many faces, in many temples, across the millennia of human history. Part 5, Cross-Cultural Echoes, the Demiurge by Other Names. If the Demiurge truly exists, an ancient entity masquerading as God, the architect of a material prison, the force that veils humanity from the true light, then its fingerprints should not be limited to Gnosticism, or Christianity, or the Vatican. It may have appeared everywhere, under different names, in legends that seemed unrelated, across tongues scattered by the curse of Babel. And once you start piecing these fragments together, a terrifying picture begins to take shape. 1. Ancient Persia, Ahura Mazda and Engra Mainyu. In Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, the cosmos is a battleground between two primal forces. Ahura Mazda, Lord of Light, Wisdom, and Truth. Engra Mainyu, Ahriman, the spirit of deceit, corruption, and destruction. Ahriman is not merely a symbolic evil, he is a separate, self-existent force, not created by Ahura Mazda, whose singular goal is to distort the minds of humanity. The Gnostic Demiurge, blind, jealous, and ambitious, echoes Ahriman in eerie detail. Both seek not to create true light, but to build a counterfeit world. A matrix of deception. A kingdom of illusions. 2. Hinduism and the illusion of Maya. In Indian philosophical traditions, especially Vedanta, there is a profound duality. Brahman, the ultimate, formless, unchanging truth. Maya, the illusion that shrouds reality and entraps the soul in false perception. The god Brahma, creator of the material world, is not the supreme deity, but rather a cosmic artisan, a builder of physical form. In certain Hindu schools, Brahma's act of creation is not an act of divine wisdom, but a fall from spiritual unity. In this view, Brahma becomes a mythical echo of the Demiurge, and Maya the veil he casts to hide the true nature of existence. 3. Buddhism, Mara, the master of misguidance. While Buddhism rejects the idea of a creator god, it warns of a force far more insidious, Mara, the tempter, the deceiver. Mara doesn't build empires or command armies. He binds souls through desire, fear, and ignorance. On the night of his enlightenment, the Buddha faced Mara. Not through swords or fire, but through illusions, seductions, and whispered lies. Mara said, "This world is mine. Do not abandon it." That voice. Could it have been the same as the Demiurge's whisper? A voice that longs not for truth, but for souls to remain entangled in an endless game of forgetting. 4. Greece and Rome, Kronos, Saturn, and the devourer of children. In Greek mythology, Kronos, god of time, devoured his children to keep his throne. In Roman lore, he became Saturn, god of restriction, harvest, and cycles. In esoteric Western literature, Saturn is often equated with the Demiurge, an ancient deity, ruling over matter and time. A builder, and a destroyer. A god of ritual, blood, and punishment. Temples once offered human sacrifices to Saturn. Could that be the true nature of a god who demands suffering to sustain control? 5. Even within the Bible, who is the God of this world? 2 verses from the New Testament whisper something unsettling. Jesus says, "The ruler of this world is about to be cast out." Paul writes, "The God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers." But who is this ruler of the world? To the Gnostics, the answer was clear. The Demiurge, the false god who governs through fear, laws, and domination. After the Tower of Babel, languages fractured. But the myths remained, only under new names. Demiurge in Gnostic texts. Ahriman in Persia. Mara in India. Saturn in Rome. Moloch, Baal, Baphomet in ancient cults. They all demand worship, require sacrifice, and keep humanity from ever reaching the true source. If that's the case, then Vatican theology may not be the origin, but a late iteration. Another temple serving the same ancient power, under a new banner. We are not saying all religion is false. We are asking, do we know whom we are worshipping? And if they don't know the answer, then maybe it's time we seek the true light, before the next illusion begins. We've walked a long road together, through crypts of forgotten words, across the fractures hidden within sacred symbols, and to the very edge of sealed doors deep within the Vatican's stone heart. We have seen what few dare to see. Ask the questions no one is encouraged to ask. Could it be that the faith of millions has been unknowingly guided by a being that is not the true God? Could the light we've worshipped be nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, built not to liberate us, but to keep us bound? The answer doesn't lie in stone walls, nor in ancient manuscripts. It lies in the simplest of places, where the impostor cannot reach. The human heart. True religion does not require temples of stone. Truth does not sit on a throne made of gold. And if God is real, if He is indeed the source of love and light, then He does not demand fear, or offerings, or blind obedience. He does not need us to kneel, only to remember. To remember that we come from light, not from inherited sin. To remember that our connection to the divine is not bound to ritual, but lives within every conscious breath. Here. Now. Always. If the Gnostics, the Cathars, and ancient seekers were right, then perhaps we don't need to destroy temples. We simply need to walk out of the invisible cages. The cage of fear-based punishment. The cage of rigid doctrine. The cage of passive faith. Because true light never punishes those who question. True light does not demand blindness. And the true God is not afraid of your doubt. This journey does not end in accusation. It ends with an invitation. Awaken. Open your eyes again, not with fear, but with the soul's quiet curiosity. Ask yourself, the light I follow, where does it truly come from? If it brings you freedom, love, and clarity, then walk on. But if it binds you in guilt, fear, and control, have the courage to let it go. True light never asks to be defended by blades or dogma. It only asks to be recognized. You don't need a church to connect with God. You don't need a priest to speak on your behalf. You are an immortal soul. You are a spark of the eternal. And the only thing you truly need is to remember that. And when you do, the darkness will quietly step back. The prison will vanish like fog at sunrise. We have lifted the veil. And behind it is not a monster, but a choice. Will you continue to walk under a light constructed for you? Or will you turn inward, touch your soul, and find the true light, with no name, no symbol, but everything you've ever searched for? Your journey begins right here, right now. And it's no longer about escaping darkness. It's about recognizing the light that was always yours.